A Shreveport police officer gunned down.
When a servant who has taken an oath and committed their life to protecting others is violently taken from us, we all collectively feel the pain of that loss.
As the search for her killer continues, those who knew Officer Payne mourn and remember.
Fun, outgoing, loving person, because that's who she was.
Good evening and thanks for being with us tonight. I'm Dan Jovic.
And I'm Jackie Jovic. It's a day of tragedy and steadfast investigating for the Shreveport Police Department after they lose one of their own. Officer Chatéri Payne was killed last night on Midway Avenue.
Today, the police chief addressed the public, sharing specifics about what happened. NBC6's Alexander Meacham brings us the latest. Alex.
On the evening of January 9th, 2019, Officer Chatéri Payne, a recently sworn member of the Shreveport Police Department, stepped outside her home to begin her scheduled night shift. Moments later, gunfire was reported in the driveway of the residence she shared with Tre'Veon Demarcus Anderson, the father of her child. What initially appeared to be a sudden act of violence quickly raised questions for investigators tasked with reconstructing the final minutes before the shooting. As law enforcement examined the scene, early statements, and emerging digital evidence, inconsistencies began to surface. Communications, movement data, and personal relationship dynamics pointed toward a sequence of events that was neither random nor spontaneous. The investigation would ultimately focus on decisions made well before that night, choices involving planning, coordination, and control. This case would become a detailed examination of how private relationships and concealed actions intersected with fatal consequences.
People across the country are paying tribute to fallen officer Chatéri Payne. Johnny Castro, a Philadelphia police officer, painted this portrait of Payne. He posted the picture on a special Facebook page. The Portraits of Valor page was created to honor law enforcement officers who have been killed in the line of duty.
Just that she was a human being, you know, she was putting on a uniform, getting her stuff ready to go to work, and then she was killed. But I wanted to at least let everybody know, you know, all across the country. I'm sure they had already heard. It was a pretty big story, but if they haven't, just to share her story.
Officer Castro is mailing this portrait to Shreveport, and it will be given to Officer Payne's family.
Stay with us as we unravel this shocking story and uncover the heartbreaking details of what led to this senseless loss. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what are your thoughts as the story unfolds? Welcome to True Crime Tales, where we reveal the crimes that shock communities and the secrets hidden behind closed doors. These are real people, real events, real consequences. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's begin. Chatéri Payne was a 22-year-old police officer employed by the Shreveport Police Department in Louisiana. She was born and raised in Shreveport and spent most of her life in the same community. She would later serve as a law enforcement officer. Her upbringing was described as stable, structured, and family-centered. Relatives and acquaintances noted that she maintained close ties with her immediate family, particularly her mother, and remained involved in local activities throughout her youth. From an early age, Payne showed discipline and competitiveness. During her high school years, she was actively involved in track and field, where she developed a reputation for consistency, physical endurance, and focus. These traits carried into her adult life and were evident in her academic and professional choices. Those who knew her described her as methodical, organized, and goal-oriented. She avoided unnecessary conflict and preferred structured environments. After high school, Payne made a decision to pursue a career in law enforcement. According to those close to her, the choice was driven by a desire for stability, community involvement, and long-term career growth. She enrolled in the Shreveport Police and Fire Training Academy and completed the program in late 2018. Upon graduation, she was assigned as a rookie officer with the Shreveport Police Department and had been on the force for approximately 2 months at the time of her death. Colleagues later stated that Payne took her role seriously despite her short tenure. She reportedly adhered closely to protocol, sought guidance from senior officers, and expressed interest in developing her skills. She spoke openly about her plans for advancement within the department and showed pride in wearing the uniform. Her presence on the force was brief, but documented through training records, shift assignments, and communications with fellow officers. Outside of her professional life, Payne was also a mother. She shared a young child with Tre'Veon Demarcus Anderson, the man she was in a relationship with at the time of her death. The two lived together in a residence located in Shreveport's Caddo Heights neighborhood. Their relationship, while outwardly appearing functional, was later revealed to be under strain. Court records and investigative findings would later indicate that Payne had been considering significant changes in her personal life. Evidence suggested she was planning to separate from Anderson and take steps toward living independently. These developments, while not public knowledge at the time, became central to the investigation that followed her death. On the evening of January 9th, 2019, Payne was scheduled to report for a night shift with the Shreveport Police Department. According to the established timeline, she was inside her residence earlier that evening, preparing for work. She was dressed in her police uniform and had gathered her belongings before exiting the house. At a specific point in the evening, Payne walked outside toward her vehicle, which was parked in the driveway. Within moments of stepping outside, multiple gunshots were fired. The shooting occurred in the immediate vicinity of the driveway, close to the residence. There were no indications of a struggle inside the home prior to the incident. Tre'Veon Anderson later told police that he was inside the house when he heard gunshots. He claimed that upon hearing the shots, he armed himself, went outside, and fired his weapon in response. According to the statement, the incident involved unknown individuals, and his actions were described as defensive. However, as investigators began examining the scene and reviewing physical evidence, discrepancies emerged. The positioning of shell casings, the number of rounds fired, and the trajectory of bullets raised questions about Anderson's account. Early findings suggested that the sequence of events may not have aligned with a spontaneous external attack. First responders arrived on the scene shortly after the shooting was reported. Payne was found outside, suffering from multiple gunshot wounds. Emergency medical personnel provided immediate aid before transporting her to a nearby hospital. Despite medical intervention, Payne later died from her injuries. At the time of the shooting, Payne's young child was inside the residence. The child was not physically harmed during the incident. Law enforcement quickly secured the scene and initiated a full homicide investigation. Crime scene technicians conducted a detailed examination of the driveway and surrounding area. Investigators collected multiple shell casings, documented bullet impacts, and analyzed the spatial layout of the scene. Ballistics testing was later conducted to determine weapon involvement and firing positions. Investigators also canvassed the neighborhood, speaking with residents and potential witnesses. Some neighbors reported hearing gunshots but did not observe the shooter or shooters directly. No credible evidence emerged at that stage supporting the presence of unknown assailants fleeing the area. As the investigation progressed, attention increasingly focused on individuals within Payne's immediate circle. Detectives reviewed her recent communications, personal relationships, and living arrangements. This process led to the identification of 3 primary suspects: Tre'Veon Anderson, his cousin Lawrence Pierre II, and an associate named Glenn Frierson. All 3 men were arrested within days of the shooting. Each faced charges related to second-degree murder and conspiracy. Investigators determined that the case was not a random act of violence, but a targeted killing involving coordination.
Well, Glenn Frierson, one of the 3 men indicted in the January death of Shreveport police officer Chatéri Payne, was scheduled to be arraigned today, but federal charges that he is facing prevented that appearance. He, Tre'Veon Anderson, and Lawrence Pierre are charged in Officer Payne's murder. But in February, Frierson was indicted on federal drug and firearms charges. Anderson and Pierre pleaded not guilty in April. A written order will have to be filed to get Frierson into court.
A major turning point in the investigation came through digital forensic analysis. Law enforcement obtained and reviewed cell phone records belonging to the suspects. Text messages exchanged between Anderson and the other men revealed discussions that referenced Payne's movements and schedule. These communications occurred shortly before the shooting. Geolocation data from the suspects' phones placed them in positions that aligned with the prosecution's reconstructed timeline. The data contradicted Anderson's claim that he had reacted spontaneously to an outside threat. Instead, it suggested pre-planning and coordination between multiple individuals. Further analysis of phone records indicated deliberate actions taken to monitor Payne's whereabouts. Investigators also uncovered evidence showing attempts to delete or conceal certain communications after the shooting, which prosecutors later argued demonstrated consciousness of guilt. By combining physical evidence from the scene with digital records and witness statements, investigators concluded that the shooting was the result of a coordinated plan rather than an unplanned confrontation. This conclusion shaped the charges and laid the groundwork for the legal proceedings that followed. Following the shooting death of Officer Chatéri Payne, investigators moved quickly to identify suspects with direct access to the victim and knowledge of her movements. Within days, authorities arrested Tre'Veon Demarcus Anderson, Payne's boyfriend and the father of her child, along with Lawrence Pierre II and Glenn Frierson, both associates of Anderson. All three men were charged with second-degree murder and conspiracy to commit second-degree murder, signaling that prosecutors believed the killing was planned rather than spontaneous. The charges reflected a theory that the suspects acted in coordination, with distinct roles assigned before, during, and after the shooting. Prosecutors alleged that Anderson provided information about Payne's schedule and location, while at least one co-conspirator carried out the shooting. The conspiracy charge allowed the state to hold all participants criminally responsible, regardless of who fired the fatal shots. During bond hearings, the court reviewed the severity of the charges, the defendant's potential flight risk, and the risk posed to the public. Given the nature of the crime, the targeted killing of a police officer, bond was either denied or set at levels that effectively ensured continued detention. The court also imposed strict conditions, including no contact with the victim's family and limitations on communication with potential witnesses. From the outset, defense strategies diverged among the defendants. Anderson maintained that he was innocent and asserted that he had acted in self-defense. He told investigators that he heard gunfire outside the home, retrieved a weapon, and fired shots in response, claiming he believed the home and his child were under threat. His legal team framed his actions as reactive rather than planned. Defense counsel for the other suspects initially challenged the strength of the state's evidence, particularly the reliability of digital data and the credibility of cooperating witnesses. Attorneys argued that text messages and phone records could be misinterpreted without context, and that proximity data did not prove intent. These arguments aimed to weaken the prosecution's ability to prove premeditation beyond a reasonable doubt. As the case progressed, prosecutors focused on solidifying a conspiracy narrative. Central to this effort was persuading one of the co-defendants to cooperate. Negotiations led to a plea agreement with Lawrence Pierre II, who agreed to testify against Anderson in exchange for the state removing the death penalty from consideration. This plea became a turning point. With Pierre's cooperation, prosecutors gained insider testimony describing planning discussions, timing coordination, and Anderson's role in facilitating the crime. The state also used this agreement to streamline its case, narrowing the focus of Anderson as the primary organizer. At trial, the prosecution presented evidence in a structured chronological sequence. Investigators testified that phone records showed sustained communication between Anderson and the co-conspirators in the hours leading up to the shooting. These records included call logs and message timestamps that coincided with Payne's work schedule. Location data placed the suspects in positions consistent with surveillance and execution of the plan. Cell tower pings and GPS data showed coordinated movement patterns rather than random presence. Prosecutors emphasized that the alignment of these data points demonstrated preparation and timing rather than coincidence. Text messages played a central role in establishing premeditation. Prosecutors presented messages in which Anderson discussed Payne's movements, including when she would be leaving for work. Other communications referenced positioning and readiness, which the state argued showed advanced planning. Rather than isolated messages, prosecutors highlighted patterns, repeated references to timing, location, and confirmation of movements. When viewed collectively, the messages suggested coordination among the suspects and contradicted Anderson's claim that the shooting was an unexpected event. The most significant testimony came from Lawrence Pierre II, who detailed the planning and execution of the crime. He described how Anderson provided information about Payne's schedule and how the group coordinated roles. His testimony placed Anderson at the center of the conspiracy. Investigators and digital forensic experts followed, explaining how phone records, location data, and message logs were extracted and verified. These experts walked the jury through the technical process step by step, reinforcing the reliability of the evidence. Their testimony tied digital records directly to the timeline of the shooting. Ballistics evidence showed that multiple weapons were involved and helped establish the sequence of gunfire. Firearms analysis contradicted Anderson's assertion that he fired only in response to incoming shots. The trajectory and timing of the rounds suggested that the initial shots came from outside, consistent with an ambush rather than a confrontation. The prosecution emphasized that no physical evidence supported Anderson's claim of self-defense. There was no indication of an immediate threat that would justify his actions under the law, and the forensic timeline conflicted with his statements to police. Before Anderson's trial began, Pierre formally entered a guilty plea. He received a life sentence, avoiding the possibility of capital punishment.
Says nobody has been arrested for this crime yet, so the suspect is still at large.
10, Cardi 2, have a female patient with a gunshot wound to the head. All units responding.
Shreveport police say a 911 call came in at 8:20 Wednesday night from the 1600 block of Midway Avenue.
Within minutes, officers arrived on scene and located uniformed officer Chatéri Payne, who was gravely injured from at least one gunshot wound and was fighting for her life.
Chief Raymond says Officer Chatéri Payne was off duty, but in her police uniform, in her car about to leave for her patrol shift, when she was shot in the head outside a home. She was taken to Ochsner Health, where she died from her injuries.
Every life is precious, and the taking of any human life is unacceptable. But when a servant who has taken an oath and committed their life to protecting others is violently taken from us, we all collectively feel the pain of that loss.
Chief Raymond says they're still in the early stages of the investigation and are not ruling anything out.
Suspect ran south from this location. All units look for south of this location. Y'all set up a good perimeter, a large perimeter, all working from there.
They do not believe Officer Payne was able to discharge her firearm. Officers also found a young child inside the home and do not yet know what the child witnessed. Multiple investigative teams worked overnight and throughout the day. Other law enforcement agencies have offered their support.
This morning, as I address you, we have many more questions than answers, but the dedicated men and women who investigate these kinds of violent crimes for the Shreveport Police Department are the finest anywhere. We will follow every lead wherever they may take us, and we will work to identify and apprehend the coward or cowards responsible for the brutal murder of Officer Payne.
Mayor Adrian Perkins went to the scene overnight and addressed the community during the news conference at police headquarters.
It's going to take a community effort to look into some of the roots of our problems and not just changing some policing policies. I said I hope everyone can pray and put their family members, Officer Payne's family, in their thoughts. And we have to move forward. We have to improve as a community. This is not going to be a policing problem or a mayor's office problem. This is a Shreveport problem, and we can get better together.
Chief Raymond says investigators will be working around the clock until they find justice for their fellow officer. Now again, the suspect is still at large and nobody has been arrested at this point. Shreveport police encourage anyone with information to contact Crime Stoppers, or you can log on to lockemup.org. Back to you.
Prosecutors stressed that this plea strengthened the case by providing first-hand testimony that corroborated digital and forensic evidence. Jury selection focused on ensuring impartiality, particularly given the victim's status as a police officer. During opening statements, prosecutors outlined a calculated conspiracy, while the defense argued that the state's case relied too heavily on a cooperating witness with incentives to lie. Over the course of the trial, prosecutors presented evidence methodically, building from digital records to witness testimony to forensic analysis. The defense attempted to raise doubt by questioning Pierre's credibility and suggesting alternative interpretations of phone data. After deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict on charges of second-degree murder and conspiracy. Jurors rejected the self-defense claim, citing inconsistencies between Anderson's statements and the physical and digital evidence. The court sentenced Anderson to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, plus an additional consecutive sentence for conspiracy. During sentencing, the prosecution summarized the evidence and emphasized the deliberate nature of the crime. Defense counsel preserved objections for appeal. Anderson appealed his conviction, arguing procedural errors and violations of constitutional rights. Appellate judges reviewed the trial record and found no reversible error. The conviction and sentence were upheld, bringing the legal proceedings to a close. By the time of Officer Chatéri Payne's death, investigators determined that her personal relationship with Tre'Veon Demarcus Anderson had entered a critical phase. Evidence presented in court showed that the relationship was no longer stable and had been moving toward separation. This deterioration became a central factor in understanding motive. Testimony and digital records established that Payne had begun taking concrete steps to distance herself from Anderson. These steps were not symbolic or temporary, but practical and deliberate. She had communicated to people close to her that the relationship was ending, and she was actively preparing to move forward independently. Investigators revealed that Payne had made arrangements to move out of shared residence. This included identifying alternative living arrangements and organizing personal belongings. These actions indicated a clear intent to separate her life from Anderson's, both physically and financially. The timing of these preparations, occurring shortly before the shooting, became significant during the investigation. The separation also involved changes in communication patterns. Messages between Payne and Anderson showed increased tension, shortened responses, and a shift away from reconciliation. This withdrawal appeared to coincide with Anderson's growing concern about losing control over the relationship and his access to Payne and their shared child. From an investigative standpoint, these developments suggested that the relationship was no longer negotiable.
And those who personally knew Officer Payne are devastated. NBC6's Dominique Dillon joins us now live from Midway Avenue with reaction. Dominique?
Well, Jackie, we spoke to someone who knew Officer Payne as a local high school student. She says she was a true leader and she's shocked by her death.
Fun, outgoing, loving person, because that's who she was. Everybody knew her.
Chatéri Payne was more than a police officer. She was a mother, a daughter, a friend to many. Payne's former track coach reflects on her time at Captain Shreve High School.
She was a leader, no doubt about it.
In high school, she ran the 100, 200, and 4x1. Her coach says she was respected and admired by her teammates.
They looked up to her, especially the younger girls, the freshmen and sophomores coming in. They looked up to her. Her classmates respected her.
Payne was shot and killed Wednesday night along Midway Avenue, leaving many neighbors shocked by the news.
My prayers are with the family of the police officer, that got shot. I hate that happened.
Many say they're afraid for their safety.
I get up early in the morning and I have to walk across the street to get to my work car, so it's kind of scary, really.
Trying to find answers during a time of tragedy.
All we can do is pray, and God has a plan for all of us, and all we have to do is just trust Him that everything will work itself out.
And Hunt says Payne's loss will be felt by many. Back to you.
All right, thank you very much, Dominique. It is so sad.
Payne's actions indicated finality rather than conflict resolution. As the case progressed, prosecutors focused on digital evidence to demonstrate planning rather than spontaneous violence. Internet search histories recovered during the investigation played a central role. Records showed searches related to committing murder, covering up involvement, and understanding potential legal consequences. Some searches have been deleted, but forensic recovery techniques allowed investigators to retrieve them. These searches were time-stamped and aligned closely with the period when Payne was preparing to leave the relationship. Prosecutors argued that the content and timing of the searches reflected deliberate preparation rather than curiosity or coincidence. Text message records further supported this conclusion. Messages exchanged between Anderson and his co-conspirators detailed Payne's movements, work schedule, and expected times of departure from home. These communications showed a clear effort to coordinate actions around her routine. Location data from mobile devices placed the co-conspirators in positions consistent with surveillance rather than chance presence. The prosecution emphasized that these digital footprints demonstrated a structured plan, monitoring Payne's schedule, selecting a time when she would be vulnerable, and coordinating roles among those involved. Together, search histories, deleted queries, text messages, and location tracking form a pattern of intent. Investigators presented this as evidence of premeditation rather than impulsive behavior. The psychological framework of the case centered on patterns commonly seen in intimate partner violence. Experts described how coercion and control can intensify when one partner attempts to leave a relationship. Control may shift from emotional manipulation to surveillance and, in extreme cases, violence. In this case, Anderson's behavior reflected several known escalation indicators. These included attempts to monitor Payne's movements, involvement of third parties to assist in control, and efforts to prevent separation by force rather than communication. Emotional volatility was not presented as an excuse, but as a contributing factor in progression toward planning violence. The prosecution argued that when Payne asserted independence, Anderson perceived a loss of control. This perception, combined with access to accomplices and digital tools, created conditions for calculated action. The escalation from relationship conflict to murder was presented as a process, not a sudden event. Each step, surveillance, planning, coordination, marked a shift from emotional response to strategic decision-making. Following Payne's death, statements from her mother and relatives focused on the practical consequences rather than symbolic loss. They described the immediate disruption to family structure, including custody arrangements for Payne's child and the long-term responsibility of raising a child without one parent. The child's future became a central concern during sentencing proceedings. Family members emphasized the absence of a mother in daily milestones, education, and emotional development. These statements were presented as factual realities rather than appeals for sympathy. Beyond parenting responsibilities, Payne's death affected extended family dynamics. Financial responsibilities, housing adjustments, and long-term caregiving plans shifted abruptly. These outcomes illustrated how a single act of violence extended its consequences across generations. In Shreveport, public response took the form of organized vigils, memorial gatherings, and official observances. These events followed standard protocols for fallen officers, including uniformed attendance, moment of silence ceremonies, and coordinated public safety participation. While widely attended, these events also serve an informational role. They reinforced public awareness of the risks faced by law enforcement officers and highlighted the circumstances under which Payne was killed, off duty at home, and by someone she knew. The events were not framed as protests or calls for policy change, but as structured acknowledgments of service and loss within the community. Permanent memorials were established to commemorate Payne's life and service. These included monuments and plaques placed in public spaces associated with law enforcement. The designs followed traditional formats, incorporating her name, badge number, and years of service. These memorials served both commemorative and educational purposes. They provided a physical reminder of the case and reinforced a narrative that the threat to officers does not end when a shift does. Within the police department, Payne's death prompted internal reflection on officer safety beyond active duty. Discussions focused on domestic risk assessment, support systems for officers experiencing relationship stress, and the limits of professional training when personal life becomes a risk factor. While no immediate sweeping policy changes were publicly attributed to the case, it influenced ongoing conversations about peer support, reporting concerns, and recognizing warning signs in officers' personal relationships. Morale was affected not only by the loss of a colleague, but by the manner of her death. The fact that the violence occurred at her home challenged assumptions about where officers are most vulnerable. This case became part of a broader discussion on violence targeting law enforcement. Unlike ambushes during traffic stops or calls for service, Payne's murder highlighted a less visible threat: violence connected to personal relationships. It demonstrated that the risk landscape for officers extends into private life, complicating traditional safety frameworks. The case also aligned with established patterns in intimate partner homicide, relationship dissolution, perceived loss of control, and premeditation are recurring elements in such cases. Payne's decision to leave the relationship served as a trigger point rather than the origin of violence. This reinforced findings seen in similar cases nationwide, where separation increases risk rather than reducing it. A defining feature of the investigation was a reliance on digital evidence. Phone data, message logs, deleted searches, and location tracking provided a timeline that eyewitness testimony alone could not establish. The case illustrated how modern conspiracies often leave extensive digital trails, even when participants attempt to erase them. Finally, the case highlighted the complexities of prosecuting conspiracy-based homicide. Plea deals, cooperating witnesses, and appellate challenges all played roles in reaching a final verdict. The outcome demonstrated how layered evidence, digital, testimonial and forensic, can meet the burden of proof in complex cases involving multiple defendants. In the end, the justice system treated the case not as an isolated act of violence, but as a coordinated criminal plan, supported by measurable data and confirmed through judicial review. If you found this story as gripping and heartbreaking as we did, don't forget to like this video and share it with others. And if you want to hear more true crime stories that uncover the mysteries behind these tragic events, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss our latest stories, updates, and discussions. Thank you for joining us on this journey to seek justice and explore the truth. Together, we can make a difference. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware.